Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of GeoSpace.
I'm your host, Mohammed Salih, and I'm glad you are joining us for the New Regions Biweekly podcast, where we unpack the shifting dynamics and the nitty-gritty of Middle Eastern geopolitics. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Iraq's upcoming parliamentary elections on November 11th, a pivotal moment of sorts in the country's post-2003 political trajectory. To help us break down the issues at stake, I'm joined by Omar al-Nidawi, a Middle East analyst specializing in Iraqi political security and energy affairs. Omar is the director of programs at the Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, or EPIC, and a non-resident senior fellow with the Iraq Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Together, we'll explore what these elections mean for Iraq's domestic politics, its regional positioning, and its relations with both the United States and Iran. Before we dive in, a quick reminder, you can find GeoSpace on the New Regions website under the Watch section, as well as on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can also check out our broader regional coverage, including our reporting and analysis on Iraq at thenewregion.com. Omar, it's a real pleasure to have you on GeoSpace. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mohammed.
Absolutely. Let me start with a fundamental question first. Why should people, both inside and outside Iraq, care about these elections, really? I'm asking this because many Iraqis see elections as little more than a mechanism for redistributing power among the same elites, with the same politicians and parties, preserving their grip on privileges and patronage.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is a lot of reasons for pessimism and cynicism about the elections because, like you said, in many ways, it's just a redistribution of power among elites who already have carved out their shares of the economic, political, and power cake of Iraq. But at the same time, elections are important because they can always carry the seeds of gradual change. They can nudge Iraq in one direction or another gradually, slowly. And that can have important implications for the country's domestic affairs, for its regional relations, especially in a region that is fundamentally changed from what it was like 40 years ago. So, in many assessments, the next government is not going to be very different from the past in that it will be another consensus-based government. It's not going to be formed by a majority, a party that won a majority of seats in the election itself is going to be formed based on a post-election coalition in which the interest of various diverse groups are going to be, accounted for and reflected, and it's going to be heavily influenced perhaps by interference and input from external actors, Iran primarily. But it can have, again, the seeds for change. How that ruling coalition is going to be put together, who's going to be in the leading seat, what kind of compromises are going to produce that ruling coalition can influence the direction of Iraq's governance, of Iraq's regional relations, of its foreign policy, of its economic policy for the next 4 years, with serious implications, I think, for a lot of actors, regional and international, including the United States.
So, from what you are saying, we shouldn't be really expecting any sort of radical change coming, as a result of these elections, but some sort of incremental and gradual change is reasonable to expect over the course of the coming years.
Yes, and I can be a little bit more specific here. I think in one possible scenario, you have an outcome in which the power of the coordination framework factions that are closer to Iran, that are more militant, that are more hostile to the West and to the US, gain even greater power and influence within parliament. They control the government formation process, and they produce a parliament that can cater to their legislative interests and drive perhaps more resources towards their factions, align Iraq's foreign policy closer towards Iran. That's one scenario. On the other hand, in the opposite direction, you have a scenario in which perhaps the coalition led by Prime Minister Sudani wins a plurality of seats in the next parliament and takes the lead on government formation. If it succeeds, then it can drive Iraq towards a more moderate expression of foreign policy, where in balance is not only maintained in relations between Iraq and Iran and Iraq and the US, but perhaps even shifting slightly towards better relations with the US, with Iraq's Arab neighbors, and so forth. So these are kind of like the two extremes, but uh, again, it's not going to be a radical change from what we have today. It's going to be a slight adjustment, but it's going to be a noticeable shift, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years.
What about the main issues in this election that citizens care about and are likely to vote on the basis of? Is it class, gender, religious sect, ethnicity, tribal affiliations, or provision of public services, infrastructure, and jobs? What is it that is really driving Iraqi citizens to get out and vote?
Well, not much, to be honest. I think the majority of Iraqis are going to sit out the vote. They're not going to go and participate. They are disillusioned. They have seen over and over again governments formed in manners that are divorced completely from the results of the elections. So, Iraqis saw in 2010, Ayad Alawi and his Iraqiyya coalition won a plurality of seats, and they were completely marginalized in government formation. They saw in 2014, for better, more than worse, Noor al-Maliki won a plurality of seats, and he was kicked out of government because of all the problems that he had caused. They saw in 2018, Adil Abdel Mahdi, he had no seats in parliament. He did not even have a party, and he became prime minister. Mustafa al-Kadhimi was not an elected, politician. 2021, the Sadris, they abandoned the whole process, and we had a coordination framework that won fewer than 50 seats, form a government. They were not even a sixth of parliament. So there's disillusionment with what election results mean for government formation. I think a lot of Iraqis most of Iraqis are going to boycott the vote, or at least just sit at home. A lot of the people who are voting, I think, primarily for perhaps tribal or personal affiliations with candidates, more parochial interests, so to speak. People who are tied to the patronage networks of parties in power. If you're in the military, if you're a government employee, you're likely to vote because you want to protect your job, you want to protect certain privileges that you have, or because your boss is leaning on you to vote. There will be, I think, a small, portion of Iraqis who are voting to affect political change. People who still believe in elections as a pathway to political change, but that, I think, is a minority, for better or worse. I think we're going to see turnout in this election, perhaps at best on par with what we saw in 2021, perhaps even lower. And that's, again, a reflection of people not really thinking of elections as a meaningful path towards change. The why people vote is going to be, again, primarily a function of pressing financial or material interests that are short term, rather than policy or ideology driven decisions related to the programs and platforms of candidates. Of course, there's a little bit of ethno-sectarian affiliations that play, or sentiments play a role in this, but for the broader public, it's disillusionment.
Right. You mentioned the public disillusionment, and voter apathy has indeed become a serious issue in Iraqi elections. For example, voter turnout dropped from roughly 76% in the first parliamentary elections in 2005, first parliamentary elections after the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime, to 43% in 2021. And even that 43% is debatable because the method that it was calculated by the Electoral Commission was on the basis of all registered voters and not all Iraqi citizens of voting age. And if you take the latter, actually, as the criterion, voter turnout drops to somewhere between 25 to 27, 8% of all Iraqis eligible to vote. If we are going to see another low turnout this time again, what would that really tell us about the legitimacy and sustainability of Iraq's post 2003 order and political system?
Well, I think you're right about I think the point you mentioned about registered versus eligible voters is quite important. And a footnote to that is that we're actually seeing that there are fewer Iraqis who are registered to vote today than there were in 2021, about 700,000. So that's another indication of people's disillusionment with elections. What does it say about the legitimacy? I think it says a lot. It says that people don't really believe these elections to reflect their will. But legally, there's nothing in Iraq's constitution or Iraq's election law that says if you fall below a certain thresholds, then the elections are invalid. There's nothing that says that. So you could have 15 or 20% of voters turn out to vote. The results are going to be legally binding because there's nothing that says otherwise. Now, how the international community is going to view them and how the international community is going to respond to that severe depletion of legitimacy from the electoral process, I think that's going to depend on, that's going to be in the eye of the beholder, and depends on who really is going to come on top in a scenario like that. But traditionally we've seen that low turnout is good for parties that have strong and robust patronage networks because the electoral weight of their base increases as turnout goes down. So if you have, let's say you're a militia leader and you have 50,000 members and they have, another 50,000 people in their families, those 100,000 votes are going to matter more when there are only 5 million votes cast compared to when there are 15 million votes cast, 3 times as much. I think the point I was getting at is that low turnout is going to not only just look wrong and bad in terms of numbers being low, in terms of participation being low and reflects a higher level of disillusion, but it's also going to make the next parliament heavy on bad actors that rely on patronage networks, that rely on corruption, that rely on the use of militias and their influence within the security establishment to remain relevant politically, and that's going to be a compounding factor of the poor legitimacy it's going to reflect. But again, there's nothing legal that could come out of that.
Right. Let me also ask you if, any party or coalition or individual running in these elections is actually offering a real respectable governing vision. We know that, much of the political class really seems focused on expanding the public sector, reinforcing patronage networks, as you also said, and buying votes. Is there any group or leader articulating something different, something that feels like a genuine reform agenda?
Not really. I mean, even when you look at the platforms, when you look at the platforms of any political party, they're not blueprints, they're not plans, They're slogans. They're recycled slogans. I'm going to improve jobs. I'm going to fix the electricity problem. I'm going to provide more water. I am going to fix the infrastructure. I'm going to take care of youth and women and children, and I'm going to take care of the elderly. But how? What are you going to do? How are you going to? No one is going to say, I'm going to, um, create a system of health insurance that's going to be financed through the increased revenue collection through the customs, and people are going to chip in 5% and the government is going to put 35%, and there's no articulated plan for any of these slogans. It's just slogans. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you look at all the, whether it's the worst offender among the militias, or if it's the prime minister, or it's a party in between, the slogans are very similar. Everyone's going to say, I'm going to reduce corruption. I'm going to build more stuff. I'm going to give you more stuff. No real blueprint to speak of there. Now, clearly, I think the coalition, for example, of the prime minister is running on improved infrastructure, is running on balanced foreign relations, is running on better economic growth for the country. But even then, you look at it, well, you have within your coalition people who are the antithesis of these things. So how can we take you seriously? And not to trash a specific coalition of that, I'm just giving an example. There are internal contradictions within every party platform that you see in Iraq that makes it difficult for people to take them, seriously. And definitely, when you're an analyst and you're looking at it like that doesn't add up. You say that you want to, protect, freedom of press when you have just filed X many lawsuits against journalists, and you're actively crushing dissent. So it doesn't add up. These slogans, not blueprints, are very, very, I think, overused and not really convincing to a lot of voters.
Right. Speaking of Prime Minister Sudani, since he's a newcomer in this election, in the sense that he has formed his own political coalition, very much, against the will of his partners in the coordination framework, the Shia governing coalition in Iraq. Who is Sudani trying to appeal to? What kind of demographics is he really targeting with his services and development type of platform? And also, do you think he has any chance of getting cross-sectarian votes like from other communities, the Sunni Arabs or the Kurds, or no?
Well, I think he's casting a wide net, and the argument of uh, better economic development, reduced power of militias appeals to a wide range of Iraqis. Question is, do people think he's going to deliver? That's a big question. I think the record of Iraqi electoral experiences shows that there is there is a limited tendency for people to cross ethnic and sectarian divides when it comes to their to choosing who they vote for. And we saw, for example, I think I'm going back to the election of 2010, the Iraqi coalition of al-Alawi, I think at the time won seats in pretty much every Iraqi province, other than the Kurdistan region. So that was an expression, I think, of a coalition that succeeded in getting some, in generating broader appeal and crossing those the sectarian lines. How will Sudani be able to repeat that? I think he will succeed to some extent. But again, if turnout remains depressed, if turnout doesn't improve beyond, say like 45%, then he's not going to see much of that. He's not going to see much benefit from that. The core question here is, we know that Sudani has a lot of approval. He has widespread approval among Iraqis, perhaps one of the most popular prime ministers in Iraq's history of as a democracy in the last 20 years. But this passive approval, can this be translated into active support? Can it mobilize and energize people to not only say, "Oh, he's a fine guy, he's a fine prime minister, he's okay," to say, "I'm going to go and vote for him," even though he has people like Salih and Ahmed al-Asadi in his coalition. Can you go past the thing? Can you pass past the facts that he has done X, Y, and Z that are contrary to his platform, and go out and vote for him? It's that we'll see that on the 11th. But translating, I think, passive support to active engagement is going to be tricky. And let's not forget, the past prime ministers have set a very low bar for what for the expected performance from prime ministers. So just because you're the most popular prime minister in Iraq, it doesn't really say that much. Again, I have nothing against the guy. I'm just saying, these are the facts to consider.
Sure. Let's get to the regional and geopolitical context here. These elections are happening against a very different regional backdrop compared to 4 or 8 years ago. The region has witnessed the decline of the Iran-led axis. There has been growing friction between Tehran and Washington. And there's also the possibility of a renewed war between Iran and Israel, which, some tend to think might happen anytime between now and the end of the year or after. And this renewed conflict, if it were to happen, it could also spill into Iraq. Do you see these regional dynamics shaping the not the election environment per se, but the post-election government formation process in particular? Do you think this regional environment is going to affect the behavior of Iraqi political actors after the elections?
Well, it's certainly going to increase I think, the attention of important regional and international actors to what's going on in what will be happening in Iraq the day after the elections. You mentioned Iran being weaker, the 12-day war with Israel, what that meant for Iran, the possibility of renewed war, the loss of, or the defeats that were suffered by Iran's allies across the region. I think the loss of of Bashar al-Assad, the setbacks for Hezbollah. Uh, these are going to, I think, put um, an even higher premium for Iran on making sure that its core interests in Iraq are protected. If Iran is going to try and reconstitute its forward defense, as some refer to it, and try to rebuild its network of power projection across the region, if it's going to try and repair its broken corridor to the Levant, the Mediterranean, then it's going to need to have a strong and steady foothold in Iraq. And I think we're going to see that reflected in how it approaches, its friends in the coordination framework during government formation talks. And we don't know how that is going to look like yet. That depends on, the numbers are going to be important in deciding the nature of the scope of the pressure, or the nature of the pressure that's going to be used. But I think Iran is going to be see it as an even bigger priority than before, to make sure that its allies in Iraq are together and that are there in power. I think any That's why I think it's quite unlikely that we're going to see a a second term for Sudani. And if we're going to see a second term for Sudani, it's going to be heavily curtailed um, in terms of like freedom of action by the immense pressure that Iran is going to be exercising in order to make sure that it still holds the chips here. That's going to be important, and it's dealing with U.S. in terms of negotiating, an end to the tension, and in terms of uh, in terms of handling a future conflict with Israel, should that happen, which I think a lot of people expect it to happen again.
Right. And you think the reason behind this Iranian, opposition to a second term for Sudani is because Sudani has alienated Iran. They don't trust him anymore. What is, driving this opposition from Iran to Sudani?
Well, I mean, right now he's publicly saying that he's going to, crack down on the power of militias. Now, of course, he's using um, I want to say very loose terms in describing that. He's not saying exactly who he's going to go after and how and under what legal uh, basis, because after all, most of the militias that have uh, real influence and have real power, most of the influence that are on Iran on Washington's list of designated terror groups are legally part of the PMF, legally part of Iraq's military institution. So how is Sudani going to deliver on this promise of neutralizing or disarming the factions? I think he's trying to sell the US something that he doesn't have, but I think simply making that offer is going to win him hostility from Iran. I think his partners in the coordination framework see him as someone who, you know, took the opportunity that they gave him and walked away from the agreed upon rules of the game within the coordination. That the priorities of his government have shifted from the priorities of the coordination framework. They were not, I think, very happy with how he handled the issue of the PMF law. But again, they're probably going to have a better chance at passing it in even easier in an easier process after November 11, because I think they're going to have I think an improved presence within Parliament. So he exposed his cards, I think, is what I'm trying to say, in a way that's going to cause some trouble in the future.
And I assume there might be people on the other side who might say, Sudani has actually done very well to serve the interests of the pro-Iran bloc in Iraq over the past 4 years. Under his watch, the number of the popular mobilization forces, Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, has almost doubled from 122,000 to almost 240,000 now. And he has also been able to maneuver between the US and Iran in a way that has, by and large, kept the Iranian influence network in Iraq intact. Yes, there have been some strikes by the US against the militias, but it was because, the militias initiated the hostilities and attacking US bases in Iraq and Syria and the rest of the region. And that Sudani really hasn't done anything that would undermine the power of the Shia political bloc in Iran, and nothing really substantial that would challenge, the power and authority of the PMF group, or the so-called Muqawama or resistance factions. What would you say, to that? Do you think that, that would mean that Sudani would be still an attractive candidate to the Iranians, despite, the rhetoric that he has been espousing, especially in the recent month, that, the fact that he hasn't done really anything in practice that would undermine the influence and the power of the pro-Iran groups in the country?
That's a very good question. And I mean, you make very good points. And I personally have, criticized Sudani a lot for being too weak and too subservient to the militias, of appeasing them too much, of letting them run amok within the country, of allowing them to expand their economic empires and to make war and peace decisions to supplant the state, essentially. Um, he's done that, I think. I still believe that he has done those things. I think his why Iran, why the militias, why Qais al-Khazali, why al-Amiri might turn on him is that he also, I think he used that period to build his own, to try and build his own power and independence from them. And now he's become a threat. That's the thing. I think that the current theme in Iraqi politics is that the the parties, the oligarchs, they try every 4 years to bring a weak person to make him prime minister, someone who's non-threatening. That is the primary criteria for which Iraqi prime ministers are chosen over and over again, is that not objectionable, non-threatening, and incompetent is even better. But every now and then, someone tries to accumulate power, to carve out a certain zone of independence for themselves, and that destabilizes the system. The oligarchs don't want that. So I think yes, Sudani has been a good manager, to borrow the words of Qais al-Khazali, but he's trying to change that dynamic, and that's what threatens the relationship between the two camps.
I think all of this somehow, brings us to the United States and the role that the US is going or can play in the aftermath of these elections. We have seen a more hostile rhetoric and set of actions actually under the Trump administration towards the Iran-backed armed factions inside Iraq. We even recently had Secretary of State Marco Rubio call on the Iraqi Prime Minister to specifically using the word disarm, to disarm the militia groups in Iraq. And we have had also the appointment of a special envoy, Mark Savaya, by President Trump to Iraq. So, does all of this tell us that Washington is gearing up to play an important role in the government formation process after the elections? Who gets to be the prime minister, who gets to be in the government, who gets, what share of power. Should we expect the US to play a more active role compared to 2021, for example?
Well, it tells me that Washington wants to do more, but doesn't know how to do more. These are, I think, these moves you described are expressions of really not thoughtful diplomacy, to put it diplomatically. Um, Again, talking of disarming the militias 2 weeks or 3 weeks before an election doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you think of Sudani as an ally, why push him now? Why put a target on his back before the election in a way that only ensures that the militia is going to try and unseat him or even kill him? I mean, they try to assassinate Mustafa al-Kadhimi. It's not something that's beyond the Qatar Hezbollah or the others. This is, if you don't think of him as a very capable person, like, wait until if you don't think he's not going to stay in power, so wait until after the election, see who's going to be in power and talk to them. And again, it reflects, I think the call to disarm the militia reflect a very, perhaps a lack of appreciation for the details of what's required here. We mentioned now, that all of these militias, Kilab Hezbollah, Asaba al-Haq, Harakat Hezbollah, Najib, all of these are legally part of the PMF. So under what legal authority is the prime minister going to say, you give up your arms? He can't do that. And even if he decided to go rogue and say, well, this is an emergency situation, I don't care about the law, I'm just going to have to act to protect national security, which element of the Iraqi security force is going to fight potentially to clash with the militias to disarm them? And let's say, let's say the prime minister orders the counterterrorism service to go and disarm one of the factions. What are the others going to do? Are they going to just sit by and watch while they wait their own turn? They're going to take action. They're going to take military action to oppose this move. So the call to disarm the militias by Washington doesn't really reflect, again, a thoughtful appreciation of how things are in Iraq. Pushing a prime minister to do something that would probably requires years of careful, shaping of economic, security, legislative, and political environments to prepare to, reduce the power of the militias and expand the power of the state institutions. Trying to do that in a few weeks before an election, I think that's just not good. That's just not smart.
Do you think that that kind of position taken by Washington is going to further complicate and compound the government formation process after the elections by, for instance, making the more pro-Iran groups, especially the political wings of the armed militias, more resistant to play a constructive role in the government formation process and backing someone that they might, consider or deem to be closer to Washington than to their camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to activate their survival instinct. It's going to make them come together and try to, I think, basically veto anyone who they think might be open to Washington's overtures, and that they're going to try and make sure that the next prime minister is going to be more so in their camp and on their side to avoid a future conflict. They're going to try to protect their flank. They don't want a prime minister who will be open to Washington's suggestions to disarm the militias. That's not going to be, that's not going to work for them. They're not building this system so that they can hand it to someone who can dismantle it and dethrone them easily.
Right. What about the special envoy Mark Savaya? Do you think his appointment has, right, a few weeks before the elections, this appointment has anything to do with, some sort of desire in Washington to want to play a more proactive role in shaping the next Iraqi government?
It's unclear because really there's very little known about this new envoy, what his qualifications are, what his experience is, what his mandate is. Does he answer directly to the White House? Does he work through the channels of the State Department? What is his primary mission? All of that is unclear. There's very little transparency. It's not even clear if he's there are rumors that he's in Baghdad. There are rumors that he's not. It's a lot of it's so far it's a mystery. The president wants to do something towards Iraq. What is it? It's not clear. It could be. I mean, the choice of a person who is engaged in business could suggest that the White House has some business ideas to engage in Iraq and in Baghdad, a place with a huge economic and business potential and very loose operating environments. That could have been something that played a factor in the choice in nominating a person with a business background to send to Baghdad. But again, it's too early and to tell, and there's very little known about what initiatives this person is engaged in right now.
And
Sorry, that was a nothing sandwich there because
no, no, I
I
totally
really don't
understand.
know.
He's a new appointee, and he doesn't really have a political track record as such. So, but we have also seen him make a number of statements over the past couple of weeks, mostly on X. For example, he put out a statement, I think it was on October 30th, where he also said there is no place for armed groups operating outside the authority of the state, which seems to reinforce, Rubio's call for disarming the armed groups. But to me, it also sounds like, quite a bit watered down, toned down. It's not calling for disarming them. It's just saying they shouldn't be operating outside the authority of the state, which seems to also signal a more flexible attitude, at least on his part. These groups could be regrouped under a different name and claim to be part of the state. And he has also, said that that the U.S. Would engage with Iraq and support its continued pursuit of stability and sovereignty. And I think when the word sovereignty and stability comes up, a lot of people hear Iran,
Right.
directly or indirectly. Do you think, in that sense, is he someone who is aligned with the other, agencies of the U.S. government, the State Department in this case in particular, when it comes to Iraq policy, or does he seem to have some ideas of his own, especially, given that he's also someone of Iraqi origin and might have a different perspective on, what is the problem, how to solve them, and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the main theme here is there's been very little transparency in this. We don't know really much about this guy. It seems that this channel is kind of built outside of the confines of the State Department and more of a White House initiative. Uh, I really don't want to speculate because analysis
That's
built
okay.
on no information uh, is gonna put me is not gonna sound good.
Sure. No, I totally understand that. Do you think there's a perception in Washington that, Sudan is somehow their best bet for prime minister? Somehow like Washington's guy in Iraq, not to mean that he gets his policies and priorities dictated from Washington, but do you think that Washington has, or at least some important actors in Washington have that sort of attitude toward Sudani, and that he's also trying to reorient himself and Iraq closer to America?
Well, I think that's a good question, and really don't know because who is in charge of the Iraq portfolio now? Is it this guy? Is it Mark Savaya? Is he the point person on Iraq? Like I remember a time when Vice President then Joe Biden was the what had the Iraq portfolio. But who does have the Iraq portfolio right now? Is I don't think there is a I think the specific positions within the State Department hierarchy that deal with Iraq are currently some of them are currently vacant. So that leaves a gap. This person came out of nowhere. The president's and White House priorities shift day to day and are more of a response to the media cycle or to Twitter and or Truth Social than it is to actual problems on the ground. Um, So it's it's a very confusing situation to be honest. But setting that aside, I think focus on individuals is often misguided when it comes to policy towards Iraq. Focus on the institutions if you can. That's always a more uh, that's a stable ground. That's real. That can be the beginning of real change, of real relationships, because individuals they come and go. Individuals cannot really their influence and their impact is temporary, and they can be influenced. They can be changed themselves. So this fixation on is this guy Iraq's only chance, or is this person Iraq's best chance? I think that's looking in the wrong box for solutions. To fix, if you want Iraq's sovereignty restored, if you want Iraq's politics to be more democratic, focus on the institutions. And I think a key starting point for anything in Iraq is really to look at, we have elections next week. Uh, the original sin in Iraq's politics is the fact that militias can operate political parties and that political parties can operate militias and they can uh, manipulate the outcome of elections and really, eviscerate the outcome of elections. That's where fraud and manipulation happens. It's not on whatever happens on election day itself, ballot stuffing, whatever, voter intimidation. That's not really where the fraud happens. That's not really where things have gone wrong with Iraq's politics. Things have gone wrong because there is a constitution that says militias should not be formed outside state authority, that members of the armed forces cannot engage in politics, that political parties cannot have their own private armies, cannot have militias. The political parties law says that too, but almost every powerful political party in Iraq and every powerful militia acts in contravention of these rules, and that's the biggest problem in Iraq's politics.
And what about the, integrity of these elections, given the sensitivity, the significance of these elections in light of the broader regional changes in the Middle East? Should Iraqis be worried about the integrity of these elections? Are we going to see, or are we seeing signs of possible fraud, institutional manipulation that could really significantly change the outcome of elections, or no?
Um, Setting aside what we just said about the biggest problem happening really months and years before any election happens, I think there are concerns about the capacity of IHEC, that's the Election Commission, to handle this election. IHEC is going solo basically for the first time in 20 years. UNAMI is packing and leaving. USAID, which provided support in the past, is gone. Um, I have been trying to just visit IHEC's website for weeks and it's down. So an election commission that can't keep its website running, I have doubts, I have questions about its ability to handle the immense volumes and complexity of data that are involved in a national election of this magnitude. I, you know, I don't, I think that there we're going to see problems. I hope not, but I think when the vote happens and the dust settles, something is going to go bad. Something is going to go wrong.
I think, apart from the fact that the political field in Iraq has never been a level field, right? Some actors have certain advantages that others don't. But there have been always complaints about fraud and manipulation, whether it's in Iraqi elections or in the Kurdistan region. And I think in the 2018 elections, Iraqi parliamentary elections, there were especially a lot of complaints about
Mhm.
irregularities, and there were this widespread perception that the outcome did not reflect the votes that had been cast. Now, the state never confirmed that, so we don't know if that's actually true or not. But I think, what you raised in that sense, especially given that the UN assistance mission in Iraq, UNAMI, is not really involved anymore, its mission going to end at the end of the year, that calls for some concern. But there's also another institution that really sort of acts, at the black swan of Iraqi politics, the Federal Supreme Court. We have seen that the court, intervened in 2010 and 2021 in a way that really upended the outcome of the elections, right? With the Al-Iraqi and Maliki in 2010,
Hmm.
then in 2021 with Sadr and the rest of the coordination framework. Do you see any possibility of the court again, sort of going for a surprising measure or ruling that would, change what people expect to be the outcome after the elections in terms of government formation?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I don't know how exactly, but I mean, unfortunately, there is a lot of political influence and pressure that takes place that influences the work of the judiciary, especially at its higher echelons. Now, the senior judge goes, is replaced, someone else comes, but there's always political influence. There's always militia influence. How it's going to be reflected, I think it's going to depend on what the outcome is going to be and how much shoehorning is going to be needed to make sure that the powers that be, the actors who have that influence, who can wield that influence on the judiciary, can get what they want. I think, unfortunately, that's the reality of it. I hope
Before I
that
let you,
that the judiciary. Sorry.
yeah, sorry, complete what you were trying to say.
I hope that the Supreme Court, that the judiciary is going to prove this wrong. But like you said, at least two presidents in the past, 2010 and 2021, really shifted the goalposts on the parties competing for government formation and upended the process, brought people completely who were completely not in position to form government and put them in the driver's seat. So yeah, I mean, it's a high possibility that we're going to see something similar, either through changing of rules, either through disqualification of a certain party or a certain individual, changing of maybe withholding certification of certain results, or something could happen if if political negotiations don't produce the desired outcome for those who hold the influence, then the judiciary becomes I think, a fair game tool to use.
Right. And my final question is, if you were to place bets on like a number of individuals who, might be likely candidates for the job of prime minister after the elections, give me a number of individuals that you think have some chance in that regard.
Sorry, you want names like potential
Yes,
candidates?
yes,
Oh, I'm
name
not going to do
some.
that. No, I'm not going to do that because, and here's the thing. Here's the thing, Mohammed. Uh, I've watched enough elections in Iraq. I've analyzed, the outcomes and negotiations, and watched governments being made enough times in Iraq to know that whoever is trying to become the prime minister usually does not become the prime minister. And we just, earlier in this conversation, we talked about, you know, all the curveballs that happened during those government formation processes. They take forever. There is room for every potential party that wants to, interfere and to influence and to shape and to coerce and to cajole to do that. And often, almost always, with perhaps one exception, the outcome is that whoever wanted to be prime minister is not prime minister. And the person who gets the job is someone you didn't even think was not even on your radar. Haider Abadi was not on anyone's radar in 2014. Mustafa al-Kadhimi was not on anyone's radar in 2020. Was 2020? It was 2020. Adil Abdul Mahdi was not on, well, may have been on some old radars back in 2018. And again, with the exception of Maliki in 2010, and again, completely by overturning, sorry, by overturning the election results, you don't, the people who are the primary candidates for the job are never there. So I'm not going to make any predictions.
Well, that's a very wise thing to do, I think, given what we have seen in the past. That wraps up today's conversation. Omar, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and hearing your sharp insights on Iraq's elections, and where the country could go from here. For our listeners, Omar al-Nidawi is the Director of Programs at Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, EPIC, and a non-resident senior fellow with the Iraq Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs. And to everyone tuning in, thank you as always for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of GeoSpace.